Yeah.
This is Geek Therapy Radio.
What are we waiting for?
And now your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger.
Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. I am your curator of the mind, your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. That's like hamburger, but all E's. I am very excited about the show today. I have author Kate Howells on in segments 2 and 3. She wrote a book called Space is Cool as F. It's the whole curse word. I say it once, but I'll beep it out for the show. But Kate Howells, author of Space is Cool as F. It's a coffee table book, and it's filled with all sorts of fascinating space facts and musings and just all sorts of fascinating things about the wonder that is space. And it is written in a very, let's just say, informal way. Presents some very deep thoughts and very cool stuff in a very informal way that just makes it so cool and so accessible. I don't picture it on your mom's coffee table. Let me phrase that. I don't picture it on my mom's coffee table, at least, but that's one thing that just makes it a very neat book. So Kate Howells coming up in segment 2. So let's take care of some notes, some show notes. This is what makes the podcast version of this so wonderful. If you're listening to the broadcast, thank you for joining me on KPRC 950 AM. Quick side note, Geek Therapy Radio starts its new time, 10 p.m. Saturday nights, right here on KPRC 950 AM in February. So I think it's February 2nd is the first show that starts 10 p.m. Saturday nights, right here on KPRC 950 AM. But you should subscribe to the podcast. One thing I'm able to do with the podcast, obviously, is put timestamps to each chapter, if you will. Each segment is a better way to put it. So segment 2 starts at 8 minutes. That is the first conversation, the first part of the conversation with Kate Howells, author of Space is Cool as F. That starts right at 8 minutes. So if you're listening to the podcast, you can scrub it up to 8 minutes. You can hear the start of our discussion there. At 18 minutes, that starts segment 3, and that is a continuation of my conversation with Kate Howells about space stuff, how cool space is, and what science means to us as individuals, even from a spiritual angle. So that starts at minute 18 if you're listening to the podcast. Segment 4 starts at 29. In segment 4 is just an old-fashioned geek out. Segment 4, I'm geeking out about the moon, some moon facts. I'll get to some moon facts probably here in this segment too. Geeking out about moon facts and photoacoustics. Transmitting audio, not just audio signals, but transmitting sound waves basically with light. Beaming a laser beam into your ear and you hear stuff. It is very fascinating to talk about, and so I geek out about that at segment 4. That starts at minute 29. So if you're listening to the broadcast, that's a major reason you should subscribe to Geek Therapy Radio podcast. It's Geek Therapy Radio with Johnny Hamburger. There's another network called GT Radio. That is not me. I am Geek Therapy Radio with Johnny Hamburger. If it doesn't say Johnny Hamburger, it's not Geek Therapy Radio. Did I just sound like a 30s radio guy there? Anyways, Geek Therapy Radio with Johnny Hamburger. Subscribe on the iHeartRadio app. That is what we prefer here at iHeartMedia. But it is available everywhere. You can ask Alexa to do it. You can ask Google Home to do it. Any sort of smart speaker. Through iHeartRadio app, you can play the Geek Therapy Radio podcast, Geek Therapy Radio with Johnny Hamburger. I will stop pimping that right now. Promoting that so much right now. I just want to, since the rest of the show is so cool, I wanted to get all the bulk of the housework, bulk of the house cleaning done here in the first shortest segment. The first segment's 8 minutes, second one is 10 minutes, third is 11 minutes, fourth is 10 minutes. Letting you behind the curtain, just so you know. Subscribe to the podcast. Let's talk about some moon facts on the way out here with our next 3 minutes or whatever we got left in this segment. Some moon facts just so that the first segment isn't just completely promotion for the show or ads for my sponsors, which I'll get to at the end of this segment. Don't you worry about that. I will pay some bills around here. The moon's far away from Earth. You can't just walk there. How long do you think it would take you to drive 70 miles an hour, A to B, as the crow flies, to the moon? About 4.5 months. 135 days to drive your car 70 miles per hour to the moon. And I would assume that that is the shortest distance. That is when the moon is closest to the Earth. So like when there's a supermoon, or you time it just right to triangulate just right so that you intersect with the moon. So let's say there's a supermoon planned 4.5 months from now. If you start driving straight up and hope the moon will be there when you get there, because there's not another gas station for a while, and there's no gas station on the moon. But I hope you'll just allow me to extrapolate and geek out a little bit, and that there might be a gas station on the moon. I know there's not. Can you still hear me? 12 people have been on the moon. 12 people have walked on the moon, and the last time somebody was on the moon was Apollo 17 in 1972. 1972 is the last time a human being set foot on the moon, and there was 12 of them. Our moon, the Earth's moon, is the 5th largest in the solar system. Isn't that fascinating? There's all sorts of moons in the solar system, Titan and Phobos and Ganymede, whatever it's called. There's just a lot of moons. There's a ton of moons around Jupiter. What is it, like 30-something? A few dozen moons around Jupiter? Out of all the moons that we know about in our solar system, Earth's moon, I was about to say Houston's moon, Earth's moon, well, I guess technically it's Houston's also, is the 5th largest. I think that's fascinating. There will be more moon facts at the beginning or so, and in the 4th segment, which if you're listening to the podcast, remember starts at the minute 29. If you want to slide your slider over. Let's pay some bills real quick before we get to my conversation with Kate Howells, author of Space is Cool as F. Kung Fu Saloon, 5317 Washington Avenue. Get your geek on with geeky beer and geeky drinks and geeky arcade games and geeky karaoke at Kung Fu Saloon, 5317 Washington Avenue. Just go there and geek out. You'll have a good time, I promise. Audi Central Houston and AudiCentralHouston.com. That's where you can start your search for your brand new 2019 all-electric, no gas at all, Audi e-tron. That's Audi Central Houston and AudiCentralHouston.com. Don't go anywhere. My conversation with author Kate Howells coming up. It is great. Do not go anywhere. Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio, or welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger, and I'm stoked to have on the phone today author Kate Howells. She is the author of a book called Space is Cool as and I'm going to censor that if you're listening to it on the radio, but you get the gist of it. From here on out, we'll call it Space is Cool as F, or Cool AF. But Kate, how are you doing today?
Hi, Johnny. I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Awesome. So what is the book about? I mean, it's pretty to the point with the title there, Space is Cool as F, but what kind of inspired you to make the book, and what is the book about? Why should people put it on go to Amazon or whatever and put it on their coffee table?
Well, so I have been interested in space for a long time, and I found that throughout my own personal life, I had lots of friends who didn't really know anything about space, but, you know, at a party or whatever, I would sit with them and talk about some cool thing I just learned about, and people were genuinely interested once they had it sort of explained in plain terms. So this book is an attempt to kind of open that up to a broader audience, so kind of the casual explanation from someone who's definitely not an expert in space, but who's gotten to learn a lot of stuff, but explained in, you know, ordinary terms, a casual tone, with some, you know, the type of casual humor that one might inject into a normal conversation. So it's really just trying to introduce people to some really cool topics, sort of open people's minds a little bit.
Okay, so I mean that's kind of a good way to put it. It's like it's taking deep thoughts, deep explanations, but talking about it in a very conversational, off the cuff manner, with your friends, because when we're with our friends, we might let a swear word, fly here and there, just very casually. And that's a very good way, I think, to get across very intellectual topics in a way that people can understand, because maybe they don't need to necessarily, maybe you'll agree with me or not here, that they don't necessarily need to agree with all the math involved in it to just get the concept of it, and get the concept that space is really big, it's cool as F, and it's a very fun thing to investigate. And if anything, I'm sorry if I let you speak here in a second. To me, what this would do is spark someone's interest in astronomy or in physics. So maybe people might think that this book is kind of a relaxed way of going about, introducing space to people. But if it sparks people to take a genuine interest in space, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, one of the things that I try to emphasize throughout the book is that I'm not a space expert. I don't have a science degree. I kind of stumbled into the world of space through the policy angle, but I'm not an expert. I have a few friends who wrote sort of guest chapters who are also presented as non-experts. These are just ordinary people who like to read online about space stuff, and it's really trying to encourage people to have the confidence that they can engage in these kind of topics. I mean, space is great because it is really accessible. Like, you can just look at a picture of Jupiter and get it, that it's cool. And, there's a lot of things, like the whole book is just simple explanations of pretty simple information. Like, you don't need to do a bunch of calculus to understand what I'm talking about, but it's obvious that it's cool and exciting. So I really want to kind of hook people in and say, like, science and nature, they're accessible to you. You don't need to be intimidated because you didn't do well in science classes in high school or whatever.
Right.
This is something that's open to everybody. And then, if I can kind of excite people and inspire them to do a little bit more digging on whatever topics they come across in the book that interest them, then that's a win for me. That's really what I want, is more people to get curious and start pursuing their curiosity.
Sure. So something that I still do from time to time, most recently with the recent Wolf blood moon. I've got two telescopes, a big one and a small one. The big one is a giant 5 foot tall, 8-inch aperture, huge thing. And what I used to do, and I want to get back into it more, was I would go out. I used to work nights, so I would get off work at 4 a.m. and I get home and it'd be me in the telescope while the world was asleep. And looking up at the stars through the telescope, even just with a naked eye, I tell people, like, look up once in a while, just at night, just look up and look at a star. And it's kind of like a meditation almost. Just look at it and think about it for maybe a minute, because it helps you learn so much about yourself through looking at space. And that's one reason I think this book is just wonderful, because I think when people start looking at space and looking at the Earth and just getting more into science, pardon the parallels here, but it's almost like a religious experience.
Oh, yeah.
You learn so much about yourself and what your place in the universe and what is my role here and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of people get scared maybe when some people look up in the sky, they might feel alone. I'm just a little speck of dust that doesn't matter. I think a different way. I'm honored to be a part of this universe. I am a speck of dust here, and what is my purpose here? Like, I'm here, part of this. I'm molecules that coagulated into something that is supposed to serve a purpose. So I think people getting sparked through your book or otherwise, what I'm trying to get across to listeners here is do it. Look up and do it and get into science of some sort, because you learn a whole lot about yourself. Kate, do you have any input on that? I was going to ask another question after that.
Yeah, no, totally. I would love to comment on that. I've always felt that my own understanding of science and nature, and especially once you kind of go off planet and start learning about space, it's always had a sort of spiritual feeling to me where, the sort of the glory of creation, even if you don't believe in a creator, even if it's just, the spontaneous creation of the universe, or however you think it came about, I mean, appreciating what is out there and what's possible and what phenomena occur, and some of them are gorgeous and some of them are crazy. And I mean, to me, that's always been spiritual. And I feel almost like an evangelist, where I want to, convert people to this and show them what I've experienced. It does definitely have a lot of parallels to sort of religious experiences and people wanting to like preach. You know, someday I'd love to set up, you know, a church of space and have a weekly sermon about some cosmic phenomenon and, you know, how you can think about it and how that might make you feel about your own existence, that kind of thing.
That's such an awesome idea. To let people behind the curtain here, I myself, I am a Christian. I identify as a Christian, but there's no but. I'm not making excuses for it.
Yeah.
But I can look at the stars, and it takes none of the wonder, of the mystery, of the science out of it. Just that my personal religious belief has no effect on the wonders that I see out in space, and wondering about stars and how they're formed, and the hydrogen operations and nuclear fission and all that kind of stuff. It just makes it, I'm like, man, if there is an architect, that I want to talk to this person, because like I want to see all the blueprints here, and this is really neat to me. So
yeah, there's definitely no sort of contradiction necessarily between religious belief and an appreciation of science. I mean, the history of astronomy is so tied up with the history of religion as well. I mean, these have gone hand in hand for so long, and it seems like there's become a sort of division between science and religion in recent history, but it's nonsense. I mean, it's not necessary.
It doesn't have to be. I think that's one of the biggest kind of lies we've been fed, is that the two are polar opposite. You know, it's possible. Yeah. I draw the analogy. It's possible to go to church on Sunday and then the lab on Monday.
Yeah,
they don't.
absolutely.
You can. The same person, the engineers and physicists and doctors are in church on Sunday or synagogue or wherever they are, but they're in the lab. They're doing cancer research. They're doing astronomy. They're doing physics during the weeks. They don't have to be polar opposites. And this is just my opinion here. I think it can kind of create a gaping hole in someone's life. Let's say they're fully religious. Let's say they go to church every Sunday, they're devout Wednesday night Bible study, everything like that. But if they completely ignore science, if they just say fossils are the devil trying to deceive us, that's bull. And I think that kind of creates a different void in their life. You know, people say they have this God hole, that people need to fill this God hole. Well, you can fill the God hole, but you can still leave the brain hole there.
Yeah.
So why not fill both? There's nothing wrong with someone doing both. And we'll leave the conversation there for now until the next segment here on Geek Therapy Radio. Use this opportunity to make sure that if you're listening to the podcast, you've got that subscription box checked. Also use this opportunity to check out Audi Central Houston and the new 2019 fully electric, zero gas burning Audi e-tron SUV. It is a thing of beauty. I did a review of it on my YouTube channel. It is amazing. Audi Central Houston and AudiCentralHouston.com. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more Geek Therapy Radio and my conversation with Kate Howells, author of Space is Cool as F. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. As always, I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger, and I've been having a fascinating discussion with Kate Howells. She is the author of Space is Cool as F-U blank blank. And yes, we're talking about the book, but more importantly, we're talking about how we can apply science in our lives and how science, for a lot of people, is almost a religious experience. So let's hop right back into that conversation with Kate Howells. Kate, did you grow up watching Bill Nye like the rest of us?
I did, yeah, absolutely. I have clear memories of the TV and VCR being wheeled into the classroom when the teacher was out sick or whatever, and everyone going nuts because we get to see Bill Nye. Yeah. Yeah.
The metal cart, you knew that the day was going to get lit once that cart's rolling in with the VCR.
Exactly.
It's actually what I remember the teacher, and I know your time's short here. We're going to wrap it up here in a second. But the teacher, more often than not, the tape wasn't rewound. So usually there's that awkward, well, let's just wait a few minutes while the tape rewinds. Like, what are we going to do? Just twiddle. I just remember that awkward kind of, here, let's press play and it's way too far. Let's rewind it for 5 minutes. What are you going to teach us in 5 minutes? So, but you had Bill on the book briefly.
Yeah, so I'm lucky enough to actually work with Bill in my day job. I work for an organization called the Planetary Society that does public education and advocacy in support of space exploration. And Bill Nye is the CEO, so I've gotten to work with him for about the past 5 years, and we've become friends in that time. So when I was working on the book, and I said, hey, Bill, I'm working on this book. I would love if you could, write a little blurb for the foreword or something. He said, well, let's sit down and do an interview. So I drove down to New York and sat in a park with him and my editor and publisher, Martin Green, and we sat and we talked to Bill for about 2 hours, just asking him every question we could come up with about space and science and the future and humanity and his views on everything. I mean, I think we'd even touch on religion. I'm not 100% sure because it's been a couple of years now, but, you know, Bill's super smart, super interesting and open-minded person and a real good, supportive mentor and friend to me as well. So, yeah, I'm super happy to have him in the book.
Well, that's wonderful. Kate, I know that I could talk to you for hours. That's just...
I've got about 10 more minutes before I have a meeting, so there's no hurry on my end.
So Bill did, and I'm not trying to make this about Bill, but he was, Bill in the 90s was doing something that it seems like you're taking the torch of he was trying to inspire children. It seems in a way that you're trying to inspire adult children in a way.
I'm basically working with the same exact audience that Bill first reached. Like, you know, people who are roughly my age, like I'm 30 now, so people who are around my age were watching Bill Nye the Science Guy when it was airing in the 90s, and now they're, you know, we're this millennial generation, so we're adults, we're kind of coming into our own, and I'm interested in reaching out to adults specifically. I think a big part of that for me is because there is a ton of energy going into science outreach to kids. I mean, that's a huge field, and there's a lot of really smart, really talented people working on that. But I definitely noticed that there aren't that many people doing science outreach specifically geared towards adults. And I think that it's really important to do because, you know, sure, the kids are the next, you know, children are the future. The next generation is going to, you know, take over after we're done. But still, there are a lot of people who... It's not too late to open their minds. It's not too late to introduce them to the culture of science, to, you know, sort of have more positive relationship with science and nature and knowledge and learning and all that. So I'm really interested in meeting people where they are and trying to open doors in their minds a little bit. So reaching out to adults, and I mean, obviously that's part of where like the tone of the book comes in is this is not a textbook. This is not intimidating. This is totally accessible. It's even going to be a bit fun to experience, but then it's going to show you that you can learn a bit more. And I'm really interested in kind of pursuing that throughout my career, figuring out how to reach people who are kind of overlooked by a lot of the mainstream sort of science outreach efforts.
Yes, and I think that's kind of the concept we're going to start wrapping the segment on, is that one reason I reached out to you is one of the main principles of why I started Geek Therapy Radio is that we as adults, especially kind of us millennials working our way up through the system, so to speak, but of any age group, any adult of any age, you can be 65 years old, life has a way of, it's not necessarily forcing you into depression or something like that. You don't necessarily have to be fully on diagnosed depressed, but you can succumb to the doldrums of life. So Geek Therapy Radio has been all about basically what you're doing is reconnecting adults really with hobbies or interests or passions or like geek stuff. What's your geek thing? We're all geeks about something. So by having you on and talking about your book, Space is Cool as F, hopefully that inspires some people who are downtrodden and just kind of going through life and just trotting along. I mean, maybe not necessarily fully depressed or maybe even depressed. Just kind of, oh, that book sounds interesting. Space sounds interesting. I don't even need a telescope to wonder about space. You can look up and wonder about it. It might spark someone in those doldrums of life with a new passion and a new hobby. So I think what you're doing is amazing.
Great. Well, I mean, I hope so. I really do feel like there's a lot to appreciate in existence, even when, you know, life in contemporary society is definitely a bit screwy and can get anybody down, that's for sure. I mean, we're not supposed to be living like this as, you know, the animals that we are. So it's kind of, it's easy to get bogged down in that stuff. But I think that there is so much just wonder in reality and existence and nature and
all around us.
If you can open people's eyes to that even just a little bit, I think it can definitely be a source of enjoyment and appreciation of life, and you can kind of detach yourself a little bit from the daily grind and, think about, whether it's something in space or just, God, learning about space makes you really appreciate the abundance of life on Earth, the variety of life. There's so much all around us to appreciate, but it can just seem totally normalized if you're not really thinking about it. So yeah, kind of shaking people out of their patterns of thinking is, I think, really important to help people get through what can be it's a very difficult life.
Absolutely. Kate Howells is the author of Space is Cool as F. Kate, where can people pick up the book?
It is on Amazon. So depending on where you live, for people in the U.S., Amazon's probably the best way to get it, but it is in a lot of bookstores. So if you prefer to shop local, which I definitely always encourage, call your local bookstore, see if they have a copy. If they don't, ask them to order one in. But otherwise, you can get it on the internet and, pick one up. Check it out.
Thank you. Kate, thank you so much for being on Geek Therapy Radio this week.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
One more time, my eternal thanks to Kate Howells for coming on Geek Therapy Radio and having one of the most fulfilling conversations I think I've ever had with a guest. And it's like we mentioned in the interview, in our discussion, for a lot of people, science and wondering about our universe goes hand in hand with our spirituality. For a lot of people who claim to, be atheists, I think that for them, if they are scientific, don't get me wrong here. I know I've come across plenty of atheists in my life who, just because they're atheists doesn't make them scientists. It's a false equivalency. Oh, I believe in reason and logic. Yeah, do you practice it? How often? What do you focus on it? Do you focus on reason and logic like a devout, Hindu devotes him or herself to their religion? No, usually it's just, I'm not saying this is for all atheists, of course not. But for a lot of people, it's possible to be an ignorant fool, no matter what religion you do or don't subscribe to, whatever faith you do or don't subscribe to. But for a lot of people who claim not to be religious, but they are very scientific, science is a very fulfilling part of their life in the same way religion is to somebody else. And those of us who come from the perspective of having both be big proponents of our lives. Science is a big part of my life. Obviously, I started Geek Therapy Radio. My faith personally is a big part of my life. I go to church every Sunday. It is possible to be a dynamic human being and not make excuses for either or, to have a new scientific discovery and not say, well, that's the devil's work. No. What if God is just way bigger and way smarter than the box you're keeping him inside, or her? Whatever the deity is. Either way, I'm just saying, very, very fascinating discussion with Kate Howells. Make sure you do go check out and purchase on Amazon Space is Cool as F. It's just intensely fun to read if you can stomach a little bit of swearing. On the way out here, we're going to talk about, in the next segment, just geek stuff. Photoacoustics. We're going to talk about the moon a little bit, moon facts. But make sure on the way out here, you also check out Audi Central Houston and AudiCentralHouston.com. They've been very good friends of the show, so I very much appreciate their support. Audi Central Houston and AudiCentralHouston.com. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. Mental curator Johnny Hemberger. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed that conversation with author Kate Howells. Her book, Space is Cool as F. I hope you check it out. Hope you buy it there on Amazon. It's a great coffee table book. I've been reading through it. It's very fascinating. Very fascinating. And our conversation was fascinating. I hope you had as much fun as I did. What do you think the fastest... How do I phrase this? How do I phrase this? What is the fastest a human has ever driven a vehicle on the moon? So, the lunar rover, one of the few lunar rovers that have been on the moon. What is the fastest that we've been on the moon? 200 miles an hour? No. 150? No, that's still... It couldn't be that high, could it? Is it 300? Is this a trick question? Have we gone that fast? 300 miles an hour on the moon? You wouldn't feel it. You wouldn't feel the wind in your face because there is no wind on the moon. Also, if you're feeling anything on your face on the moon, you're dead. You're only supposed to feel a helmet in front of your face. Have you ever wondered, not to trigger anybody right now, have you ever, I'll get back to the top speed in a second, I promise. Whenever someone puts on a spacesuit or any sort of suit that covers the entire body, but let's stick with spacesuit. What if you get an itch on your nose? What if you get an itch on your forehead or your cheek? I'm itching my cheeks right now just talking about it. I think they have actually little brushes or something that can extend and you can itch yourself. But what about, okay, great. What if, so you can itch your cheek theoretically with a little thing that sticks out. You can trigger to stick out and rub your face on it maybe. But what if you get an itch on your chest or your back? Like the worst part of your back. Like the part of your back you can barely, if ever, reach depending on your girth. An itch on your back that you just can't reach. And so here on Earth, you need to I need to jam my back up against a corner of the wall or a couch or something like that. What if you get an itch like that in a spacesuit? What's the protocol? Go insane? I guarantee you there's so much testing. Again, I promise we'll get back to top speed on the moon. I guarantee you there's so much testing, astronaut training. Not just astronaut training, but anybody who has to put on a full body suit where you can't easily itch yourself. There's probably a whole lot of training in mental strength, mental fortitude, pain management, annoyance management. I got an itch on my elbow right now. Right now, there's an itch on my elbow. I gotta itch it. I gotta itch it. And me saying this, I know it's making you guys itch too. But there's got to be so much training in how to manage that situation. Here's a test for you to do yourself. Next time you get an itch, see how long you can go without itching it and see if it goes away. I have a theory that most itches would. Right now, I've got an itch that just happened on the back of my head. Should I get it? No, I'm not going to get it. Let's do an active experiment right now. There is an itch on the back of my head, and I'm thinking about it, and I really want to itch it, but I'm going to try to ignore it. I'm going to keep talking. Maybe this is part of the training, just to keep focusing on your job, and sooner or later, the itch will go away. And as I'm talking about it, the urge to itch that itch in the back of my head is fading. Interesting. But possibly that's because I know that I could itch it if I wanted to. What if you don't know that you could itch it? This is what Geek Therapy Radio is all about, these little mental tangents, trying to get you guys thinking, little brain teasers to get you, get the juices flowing, because we can geek out about stuff. And right now I'm geeking out about what if you itch in a spacesuit? Let's bring it all back around to how fast a human has driven on the moon. It's 11.5 miles per hour. The lunar rover from Apollo 17 drove at a blistering 11.5 miles per hour. Isn't that amazing? The moon also rotates. The Earth rotates. Yes, the moon rotates. We know that. The Earth rotates at about 1,000 miles an hour. That means if you're just standing on one place on Earth, it's swinging you around centrifugally at 1,000 miles an hour. You're on the edge. You're on the edge of the radius of Earth. You're technically moving through space at 1,000 miles an hour. You can't tell that you're moving that fast because, well, equilibrium and the atmosphere around you is also moving at 1,000 miles an hour. So relativity, you're not feeling the atmosphere really moving. Unless it's wind. Wind is the atmosphere moving. Yes, wind is also one of the contributors is the rotation of the Earth. But I'm just telling you, the Earth rotates at 1,000 miles per hour. It orbits way faster than that. I don't even know how fast it goes around the sun. Really, really fast. But it rotates 1,000. The moon rotates at 10 miles per hour. It rotates very, very slowly. The supermoon we just had last week, well, I should keep this stuff evergreen, but the supermoon we had last week, It's a supermoon. Basically, is when the moon is closest to the Earth, its closest orbit to the Earth, closest part of its orbit to the Earth, and a supermoon is typically 14% bigger and 30% brighter. That's why during supermoons, it's so hard. You got to squint at the moon. It's bright. And it's right overhead sometimes, especially in the wintertime. That's when the moon is just the brightest because the atmosphere is the most stable and it's the thinnest. Well, not thinnest necessarily, but it's the most stable and it's very bright. So supermoon is typically 14% bigger and 30% brighter. That's a lot, actually. That 30% especially, if you could turn up it's like on your dimmable lights, on your light dimmer, pushing it up an extra 30%. That's noticeable. Was I going to say something else about the moon? No, because what I really wanted to get to with this segment, the really nerdy thing I wanted to get to, besides what I just did, is I wanted to talk about photoacoustics. That is what it sounds like. Photoacoustics, acoustic energy being transmitted with light. Now, this is different than light pipe ADAT. On the back of your high-end receiver, you have that little port that says, what is it? Why am I blanking out on it? Optical output. That is sending a digital signal over light. So it's encoding a signal into bursts of red light that happen at the speed of light. And then on the other end of the pipe, there's a decoder that decodes that digital signal and then turns it into an audio signal through an amplifier and everything like that. I'm not talking about that. Photoacoustics is actually transmitting physical sound over light. So picture a really powerful laser pointed at a sheet of paper or something like that, a very thin membrane. But the laser is pulsating in brightness or in magnitude, waving up and down, physically moving the light beam. It's moving with music, with audio or something like that. And and the light goes and it pushes against that membrane, and the force of the light pushing on that membrane actually generates sound. Kind of the way a speaker works, but a typical speaker works with an electromagnet. It's a coil that bounces up and down over a magnet as the audio flows through the wires. It creates different voltages. And it vibrates. It vibrates over a magnet, vibrates through the diaphragm. That's how we hear things typically. That's just a normal speaker. Photoacoustics is with light. And researchers have transmitted sounds through a room to a listener's ear with frickin' lasers. And that's awesome. Now, you may be wondering, and by the way, only the person who the laser's aimed at could hear it. It's like a secret way of sending messages. And the laser's wavelength, the laser's color or whatever, it interacts mostly with water molecules. So it beams it over to you, and you have a little bit of humidity in your ear because of your body, and it vibrates those molecules, which vibrate up against your eardrum, and it creates audible sound. That's amazing. Isn't that cool? I thought that was the coolest thing ever that I read today. Thank you for listening to Geek Therapy Radio. I truly appreciate it. You have lots of choice in podcasts, and if you go subscribe on YouTube, you have a lot of choice there. So I very much appreciate you making Geek Therapy Radio a part of your routine, your weekly routine. It means a lot to me. Thank you for listening on KPRC 950 AM. In February, starting February, Geek Therapy Radio moves to 10 p.m. Saturday nights here in KPRC 950. That's awesome. Be good to each other. Be good to yourself. I'll see you next time on Geek Therapy Radio.